The Dow has done it again. This makes 3 days in a row of triple-digit gains for the blue chip average. The S&P is up 7 straight days, its longest winning streak since July. Here are the closing numbers. The Dow soared 135 points, the Nasdaq was down 4, and the S&P added 5 points. Over in the bond market, U.S. Treasury bonds rallied after an auction on the benchmark 10-year note attracted the highest demand in 6 months. $21 billion worth were sold at a yield of 2.94%. That's the highest Uncle Sam has paid in 2 years.
But, Susie, that Treasury auction paled, actually, in comparison to Verizon's history-making corporate bond offering today. That's the biggest ever on Wall Street. The telecom giant sold a staggering $49 billion worth of bonds today, and incredibly, that was only about half of what investors were willing to buy. It will use the proceeds to help finance its purchase of Vodaphone's 45% stake in those two companies' Verizon Wireless joint venture. David Faber joins us now with more on the massive side of this bond sale, and you've been following this deal for months, really. What does this say, and why is it so important? What does it say about Verizon? What does it say about the bond market? Why are so many people paying so much attention?
You know, there's been insatiable demand, it would seem, for bonds from good corporate borrowers, that, of course, being the likes of a Verizon for quite some time. In fact, it's been one of the underlying stories, not just of the bond market, but of the equity markets, the stock market as well. We've seen so many corporations issue bonds, being well received, being able to get interest rates that historically we've never seen anything like them. Even with the move up in rates in the last 5 months, they've used a lot of that money to buy back stock. That in turn has helped the stock market. In this case, Verizon, as you say, using the money to help buy out the 45% of Verizon Wireless they don't own. But it's incredible, that $49 billion number. We've never seen a number that large in one day. So many of the viewers who may be investing in bond funds, for example, those are the guys stepping up and saying, I want some of that. Please bring it on. I need as much as I can get.
You said a lot of blue chip corporate borrowers have been going to the market. And we saw just a few months ago that Apple did that, went and did an offering. But it was a lot less than what Verizon's offering. There have been a lot of comparisons about Verizon and Apple. Verizon offering a 5.2% bigger premium than Apple, 2.4%. Why all the differences?
Yeah, I mean, Verizon offered across the spectrum. So they went from as little as, I believe, 3 years right up to 30 years, Susie. So they really hit all sorts of durations. Apple, of course, borrowed at the low. It was in May, I believe, when the 10-year bond was yielding 1.6%. It was the best time to issue in the history of issuance ever. We're up, of course, over 100 basis points since then on the 10-year Treasury yield. Hence, you borrow at a spread to that. Verizon is a great credit, but not quite as good as Apple, which had enormous sums in the bank. The problem for them is much of that money was overseas, so they decided to borrow here to fund a buyback.
Verizon is going to pay something like $130 billion to buy out that 45%.
That's
is that right?
correct.
So where does the rest of the money come from?
They're using stock. They're using their own stock to purchase the remainder of it. So they will issue Verizon shares to Vodafone shareholders, and Vodafone itself will also take in this roughly, let's call it $60 billion. They've sold much of that debt in cash. So it's $60 billion in cash and roughly the same, a little bit more in stock. That's the consideration for what, by the way, is the third largest deal of all time. So we've got the third largest deal and the largest corporate bond offering we've ever seen.
Real quick question. Any risks here? Any chance that this Vodafone Verizon deal doesn't go through? And then what would that mean for you as an investor if you bought these bonds?
You've got nothing to worry about if you're an investor. However, the risk of this deal not happening are extremely low, because Verizon already controlled Verizon Wireless. So in this case, when the FCC or the DOJ were to weigh in, there's no change in control. In fact, they may even view it more positively because you don't have a foreign buyer any longer owning a U.S. telecommunications provider.
David, thanks. Great to have you with us.
My pleasure.
David Faber.